So, Mike, when we think of Altitude, not a business that most New Zealanders would be familiar with, and yet you have a pretty extensive global footprint. How did the business come about?
Well, I mean, I think the best way to describe the business is it came out of isolation. We came out of the isolation of Air New Zealand, sitting in the bottom of the world, and before digital data, having to modify and repair its own aeroplanes, and a bunch of engineers developing this stuff built up a level of skill and knowledge that really an airline probably wouldn't have needed in a modern world. We took that knowledge and over the first decade of this century, started applying it not only to Air New Zealand as they changed from a pretty conservative airline to one with the best interiors in the world. We took that knowledge and then we went and applied it to the global marketplace and went out there and won customers on the back of stuff we'd done for Air New Zealand, and turned that into an export company in 2008 when we launched. So very briefly, that's how we came about. We're a product of New Zealand's isolation, reversing that and going out and realising we were as good as the best in the world, and sold it to a global marketplace.
And what was interesting is that some of the genesis of the idea came out of the collapse, or the near collapse of the airline in 2001, and a real back to the roots of thinking of new business opportunities. So what was the actual sort of ideation process? There was somebody suddenly thought, hang on, we could get into interior fit outs.
And we'd tried something earlier in the 90s. We'd thought we could go and play in the engine space. We're really good at modifying engines, and that's a complex thing to do. But we realised it was big players in there, the big engine manufacturers, were going to make it hard for us to create a business out of that. So we'd already played in getting into a global engineering aerospace business. So the nexus really was when Air New Zealand said, we need to do something really quickly and we know we can't get it outside, you guys need to do it. That started us thinking, hey, this is an area we could get into, because interiors of aeroplanes didn't have the big global players. The competitors are Japanese and American and European companies, but they weren't enormous, big, dominant players. So we didn't have those big, dominant players. It was also of a scale that didn't attract government subsidies. So it's interesting, aerospace, everyone loves to build aeroplanes. Every country in the world subsidises big aerospace companies. But the interiors part, although it's a big part of the airplane, it wasn't big enough to be attractive to the governments. We weren't getting Japanese competitors getting big subsidies like they were for building wings for an airplane. So it had that value to us as well. So we'd learnt the hard way. You don't go and play against the big boys direct, collaborate with them, but also get into a niche where it wasn't so dominated by big companies. And I think finally what we realised is aircraft interiors needed to be innovative, and our competitors in that environment they got lazy, basically. They got complacent. You go to them and they'll give you anything you want as long as it's a grey box, because they knew you couldn't get it from anyone else. Well, we came up and said, you know what, we can give you that. We can give you the curvy looking cabinetry. We can give you that great looking bar. And yes, we can still meet all the requirements of the safety rules, but we know we can do it differently. And so we came up with something different, and we broke into that niche, and our competitors were still not being able to catch up. So this was a sort of, it wasn't totally haphazard. We'd thought of strategically, where's this niche, where are these things that we need to avoid, and how can we be different? And finally, the other thing is it was reasonably capital light. Other parts of aeroplanes require big, expensive factories. Building furniture actually is not that expensive. The hard bit is about justifying why it's a piece of safety equipment.
So perfect market for New Zealand, nimble, weightless. And what was interesting was that when you delved in, you found some sort of macro issues about the industry, which all of a sudden made the business proposition look even more attractive. Just explain about some of those issues that came about.
Yeah, so look, one of the things that we got out there and realised is that traditional aerospace has been a traditional industry. It seems odd, airplanes have only been around just over 100 years, but it had become quite traditional, and part of that was the safety rules and regulations. And it meant that everyone has got their heads around the fact that the bit that was valuable was the factories and the hangars where you build these products. But the reality was that wasn't where there was a constraint in the industry. The constraint was in the intellectual property, the engineers designing the products. And a classic piece of statistics is that, Boeing has 50,000 engineers designing their airplanes. 58% of them are over 50. They're going to retire in the next 15 years. And we realised, we've actually know how to develop and engineers off the back of great engineers coming out of the engineering schools in New Zealand and turn them into aerospace engineers. And they're all young people, and here's a marketplace where suddenly there's a shortage of these skill sets that, hey, this is a great place to be. There's always going to be demand for that knowledge. So that was also core to our strategy. It was not getting all hung up about hangars and runways and factories, because seriously, there's outside of New Zealand, there's lots of those available. The bit that was short was that IP bit. So that's where we've concentrated development. Taking that IP, winning contracts because we know that's where it's short, but also because we're different. We say yes. We say not we can do, we will do. Our opposition says, no, can't do that. And it's just become habitual for them. So that's a great opportunity for us.
When you look at a business like this, you might be inclined to think that it's low barriers to entry, but in fact it's difficult. So it's around the compliance, and that to a certain extent also gives you some added advantage.
And I think, and you have to be careful. An aeroplane is something that flies 8 miles high, the speed of a bullet, and keeps you in a level of safety that's probably as safe as you lying at your bed at night. So it really is a very constraining environment to design something in. But then everyone goes, well, you're just doing the furniture, it's just cabinetry, that's the things that are important, the wings, the engines. Well, the reality is the aircraft interior cabin is a system of safety. It's the thing that saves you when everything else doesn't. It is so critical to the safety system of an aeroplane, and therefore to demonstrate to a regulator and the big manufacturers that you can meet those very, very stringent requirements requires a lot of effort. And if we look at it, it's taken us 10, 15 years to create that credibility, and that is a huge barrier to entry. It is just, and it's not a non-tariff barrier to entry. The traditional, we'll get a regulation to stop entrance. It really is driven by the public's need to have safety in airplanes. So we've demonstrated that. So now we're on the other side of that. We're in a great place. We're in an industry that's booming. More airplanes are sold now than ever before. There's huge forward order books. The demand's massive, and yet the bit that needs to make it happen is those aerospace engineers, and we know how to create them, and we know they're credible in the industry.
So just explain how the business actually works in New Zealand. You've got a plant in Christchurch, operation here in Auckland, and how do you work all this?
How do we do business? And and again, it's a non-traditional for aerospace. Fundamentally, the business is built around a core of engineers. We have program managers and supply chain managers, and the general support functions. We go out and get a contract with an airline or a private jet owner, a Boeing private jet owner, and then we do the engineering and design, we organise the certification, and then our program management and supply management teams organise the build and the installation of those products. So we're the head contract. That's non-traditional. The traditional manner is you own everything. You're vertically integrated. You have the factories and the runways. We weren't in that position to do that. So we clearly use Air New Zealand facilities for our Boeing private jet customers, but we build our airline furniture up in the States. But in the end, it's an Altitude product. It comes out with Altitude branding. We own it. It's our product.
Do you find that there's an issue with the Air New Zealand attachment? Your companies say, well, hang on, that's a competing airline. We're not sure if we want to do that. How do you deal with that situation?
Look, and we've got Australian customers. We've got customers from competitors of Air New Zealand. We're a standalone subsidiary. It is vitally important to us that we protect the integrity of our customers' information. Whether it's a private jet customer or an airline, these are things that are very important to them, commercially or in a privacy sense. And if we hadn't been able to demonstrate that level of integrity, we wouldn't be in business today. So, Air New Zealand might own us, but they have no view of who we're doing things for, and to the extent we do them, they understand it only from a business perspective where we're going. So,
in many ways, there's some similarity between this and obviously the marine sector. Developing specialty around luxury yachts and that sort of thing as well. Do you see kind of some similarities in the two?
I suppose where our synergies really line up is because we're at the high tech end of it's a high tech industry. We can't avoid it. The Sydney airplanes are complex beasts. is that we're probably the most affinity we have in the marine industry is at the Team New Zealand level. We have people who've worked for us and worked for Team New Zealand and come back and forward, and a lot of us went through the same engineering schools together, and we share that same sort of challenging engineering approach. We push the boundaries, and whether it's a high-speed yachts or an aeroplane, the fundamental engineering science is the same, and you can have two approaches to that. You can be conservative and reserved, or you can be the New Zealand way, which is push the boundaries, understand the science, and go to another level. And so our relationships, and especially from a even at an individual level, is very much at that level.
Yeah, and it appeals to the New Zealand DNA of we're liking to solve problems and confront challenges.
Yeah, and we as I said, people say you're a can-do, and we like to say actually we will do. We will do it. We make things happen, and I think we underestimate it as a country how valuable that is, and definitely we have a huge relationship with Boeing. It's such an important stakeholder in our industry, and I think the Americans definitely get that. They really appreciate that, because they understand that if you're not always pushing the edges, you're going to get overcome by another nation or another player.
And for companies like Boeing, it's important that you've got sort of agile people around you who are pushing those boundaries when you're a very large lumbering corporate.
Yeah, and I mean, look, it comes back to fundamentals again. Everyone, not of right, but almost everyone feels like they need to be able to travel and see their family all around the world, at a reasonable price. And a reasonable price in some of the most piece of complex technology in the world is, a huge challenge. How do you keep these super safe, very complex piece of technology, and yet deliver, great airfares to any place in the world? So massive commercial challenges on this. So the commercial side drives technology improvement. So Boeing and the Airbuses of the world are constantly trying to get more efficiency out of the airplanes so the airlines can deliver better airfares for people. So it has to still be this fundamentally very, very safe product, but it also constantly has to improve. And they need suppliers like us who are going to help them get it lighter weight, more efficient use of space, while also maintaining, in fact, enhancing the safety of the product and giving people an environment that you're going to sit in for 12, 24 hours that makes a difference. You can feel pretty uncomfortable, you can get off a plane and feel pretty fresh, and that really comes down to the interior, because there's only so much you can do with the rest of the aeroplane. Boeing really appreciate that. Airbus are a great competitor at pushing that as well. And we see it. Who doesn't go and see family every year around the world? And you do it reasonably cost effectively, and that's because the industry is constantly pushing itself.
What about your approach to innovation, just in that space? So how do you, as a company, are you constantly trying to innovate as well?
Yeah, and look, it's sort of a push-pull. Our customers come to us because they know that they can ask us to do challenging things. But we also push ourselves. So the ethos of us is we know that we're here because we are innovative, we do push the boundaries, and we know the day that we stop doing that is the day that our competitors will catch up to us. And because we're 5 years young, we in an industry where the next youngest competitor to us has been in the industry for 30 years, we can't afford to be complacent. I think Rob Fife always said to me that he said, look, you guys have got it tough initially because the incumbents can afford to fail, you can't, because there'll be just no tolerance as new guys. So burning platform, call it what you are, we can't afford to. We all know we can't afford to not be innovative, not push the limits. And, so we keep that ethos in the company. That's important to us day in, day out, to just keep reinforcing with the teams, push the boundaries. We need to, because that's what gives us, that's our meal ticket. That's our ability to be in this business.
So you have around 200 staff. The majority of those would be engineers?
So, 100 staff and, 20 odd contractors we bring in to help support us. The majority are engineers. So, but, we have a growing and even more sophisticated program management teams and supply chain management teams. We buy product from around the world. Literally, we're program managing around the clock. I think I love the example that we quite often use is we've had a customer in Central America. The owner of the airplane was a bank in LA. The product we were bringing in to install was out of Germany and Japan, and the airplane was physically having the work done in China, and we were coordinating this all out in New Zealand. It's a global business, and and that's just the chain of supply and program management we have to provide is very, very substantial. And really, we could only do this business today from New Zealand because of the internet. If we'd been 25 years ago, you just couldn't do it. You couldn't do this on the phone and a fax. We transmit data. We're on video conferences constantly, and of course, we're flying to places as well. But it's very much an industry that New Zealand can now play in because of the internet. The connection to the world has meant that New Zealand can get into businesses that couldn't have done.
So it's weightless and virtual.
Yes, yeah, and it is, and it's in some ways the timing was perfect. If we tried this 10 years on from now, I think the barriers to entry would have been just too challenging because the regulatory barriers just get bigger and bigger all the time. And if yet we tried it 15, 20 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to do it because it would have been a paper business, and you just can't move paper around here fast enough. You'd have to be in a global aerospace hub like Toulouse or Seattle. So, with a bit of luck, but a good fortune, you need that in business. We just happen to be in the right place, right time, with the right sort of people, and I think we've been lucky enough to also realise there was an opportunity and take it.
What about the split between your different customers? You've got commercial customers and you've obviously got private customers as well too. So, and does the business tend to come to you, or do you go and hunt it?
Oh, a bit of both. On the private Boeing business jet bird of the world, there's not a lot of operators. There's 120, 130 airplanes, so it's a pretty small, discrete group of people. So really in the end, it's relationships, and we know when things are going on, and we know how to approach a customer, but in the end, they approach us just as much as the other way around. In the airline side of the world, interestingly enough, it's even a smaller group. There's probably 40 airlines in the world who really buy our sort of product, which is high-end airline cabinetry. And we know who they are, and we know when they're getting airplanes, and they know who we are. So the marketing and sales is very much built on relationships and credibility, and just constantly reminding the marketplace that we know what we're doing. And I think in the coming year, you're going to see some products come out of us for some of our customers that are just going to blow the socks off everyone. We've got some stuff that unfortunately I can't show you that is just out of this world, and so we know that'll kick us to the next step, because the awareness that'll create amongst the customer base will be fantastic. So,
has it surprised you actually, how successful the company has been?
Yeah, every day I wake up and go, wow, and it's not without a lot of hard work, and we're getting some pretty tough lessons as well. I mean, airplanes is complex, and we don't kid ourselves when we go out there and push the boundaries. The boundaries sometimes push back. So it's not a business that you take lightly, but it has surprised us. But when we all sit back, we go, look, we have the right attributes. Everything sort of clicks together. There's no reason why, as long as we continue to execute, that this business shouldn't continue to grow, and we can't. And this is the bit we're all very proud of, is create a new industry within this country. There is no reason New Zealand can't play in big jet aerospace. I think I actually had my old professor here yesterday, and from engineering school, and I keep reminding him and thanking him for telling me. He said, "You guys can't get into big jet aerospace. The engineering's too complex, the capital's too intensive. New Zealand company can't do this." And I just love to prove them wrong constantly, to say, we can, you don't need capital, you can avoid the capital intensive part. We do play, we're as good as engineers, as the best in the world, whether the Germans, the Americans, Japanese, and you can do it. So I think that constantly reminds us that you've got to be careful you don't just turn off whole parts of the world's manufacturing industry because it's just too big. There are niches in there that New Zealand companies can play at, and I think we're demonstrating that's possible.
And when we think of the growth in the aviation sector in the future, businesses looking good, and therefore you can see plenty of growth potential. Yeah,
look, the stats are out there. Is between Boeing and Airbus, they've been tracking the growth of global aviation, and year on year since the 1970s, it's been growing at sort of near on 5% a year, which is faster than global GDP. So it's just naturally got these growth rates, and it occasionally has a blip, around 9/11 or SARS or some sort of GFC type thing, but it then gets back on trend. And the underlying bit to this is also, I put up a chart quite often and it says, look, in the early 90s, oil prices were cheap, cost of capital was expensive, people kept their old aeroplanes. Oil prices today, astronomical, cost of capital cheap, go buy a new aeroplane because it's 20% more fuel efficient. What it saves in fuel can easily pay for the aeroplane and the depreciation and then some. So what that's resulted in is right now there's 20,000 aeroplanes flying in the world, jet airliners. In 20 years' time, there's going to be 40,000. Those 20,000 today are going to need to be replaced in the next 20 years. So there's 40,000 new aeroplanes needed in the next 20 years. The industry is going nuts. Boeing have a forward order book in the order of 8 to 12 years, depending how you look at it. It's just, the demand is enormous. The supply chain is creaking to try and meet the ramp-up rates, and we're right in the start here. So if we fluff this, it'll only be because we've done something really stupid. There's no reason, given the constraints of entry into the business, that we shouldn't be able to make this a successful, sustainable, substantial business, and based in New Zealand.